You know, one of the great things about the democratic enterprise of campaigning for office is that, we choose our representatives, and the folks that want our vote have to ask us for it. And it means that candidates have to, go out in the world, interact with people where they can't control what happens on the trail. Particularly true for former Vice President Mike Pence. I mean, he's got a weird task before him, a very strange relationship to the voters that he's trying to win because they believe he sold out their beloved Donald Trump. That has resulted in situations where Pence has faced questions from people who may not have been at the Capitol on January 6th chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," but do hold a special kind of contempt for him, like this voter who confronted him in Sioux City, Iowa last month.
If it wasn't for your vote, we would not have Joe Biden in the White House.
Right.
Joe Biden shouldn't be there. And all those wonderful things that you and Trump were doing together would be continuing, and this country would be on the right path. Do you ever second guess yourself? That was a constitutional right that you had to send those votes back to the states.
I'm sorry, ma'am, but that's actually what the Constitution says. No vice president in American history ever asserted the all due respect, I said before, I said when I announced, President Trump was wrong about my authority that day, and he's still wrong. I believe it with all my heart.
Not huge applause there, but, he responded. And this sort of thing happens all the time. Happened again yesterday at the Iowa State Fair.
My question is this. Why did you commit treason on January 6th and not stand President Trump?
I'm a veteran, buddy. You shut your mouth.
Fair question. Look, come on, people. That's why I came.
Look, I'm just giving you the question.
No, I got you. I'll answer your question.
Now, he did get some, got boos from the crowd, and that guy defended him. When the candidate thinks, why did you commit treason is a fair question. Well, no wonder the polling looks like it does for Mike Pence. He currently ranks 6th in Iowa, just 3%. Now, at least one Iowa State Fair attendee did have something nice to say to Pence this week.
I'm glad they didn't hang you.
Come on, guys.
I'm glad they didn't hang you.
Come on. Come on.
I'm glad they didn't hang you. With just over 5 months left until the Iowa caucus, it's not much, but it's a start. Before Donald Trump, the last time that American politicians attempted to subvert the elected government and unleash violence in response to an election was, of course, the Civil War. And in the wake of that, the founders of the post-Civil War republic, the framers of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, were quite preoccupied with the fact that those who fomented bloody insurrection and rebellion against the country should be disqualified from future office. In fact, they were so concerned with it, they wrote it into the United States Constitution as Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. No person shall hold any office who, having previously taken an oath to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. Now, two conservative law professors, self-professed originalists, have published a law review article arguing that, quote, if the public record is accurate, the case is not even close. Donald Trump is no longer eligible to the office of the presidency or any other state or federal office covered by the Constitution. One of the people who's been working on this issue, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, Noah Bookbinder, president and CEO of Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, or CREW, and he joins me now. Noah, it's great to have you. First, just tell us what you were able to do, because you brought a suit under this, part of the 14th Amendment, that was successful, and I think the first time that it's happened in many, many years. Tell us about that suit.
Yeah, that's right. So we represented residents of New Mexico who brought a lawsuit to remove from office and disqualify from future office a guy named Couy Griffin, who was a county commissioner in New Mexico. He was the founder of a group called Cowboys for Trump, and he was someone who was on the steps of the Capitol on January 6th He helped to recruit people to the Capitol on that day. He encouraged violence and insurrection. He normalized that violence, even though he was not personally violent. And we were able to convince a court that that January 6th was an insurrection for the purpose of the 14th Amendment, the first court to find that, and to disqualify Mr. Griffin from office. It's the first time in over 150 years that a court had disqualified someone under the 14th Amendment. So that's incredibly significant in showing that this is a living piece of the Constitution that applies as much now as it ever has.
How did the lawsuit work? How did you sue him, and in which court, and how did you bring it?
Yeah, so in New Mexico, there is a law, and a lot of states have these laws, that basically say that citizens can go to court if there is a person who is not qualified to serve in the office in which they're serving. And so the case went to state court in New Mexico. A judge heard evidence. They heard witnesses and considered the evidence, considered Mr. Griffin's defense, and made this decision. And it will be, because we have every intention, we're preparing to take action to remove Donald Trump from ballots under this provision, a similar kind of provision to show that he is not qualified to be on the ballot for president because the Constitution says that he cannot serve.
So that's the big question. You've got a law review article. You've got the plain reading of the text, which I think is a plausible case. How would it even work at the federal level? What would be the actual legal mechanics by which this law would be rendered real with respect to Donald Trump?
So obviously we're on ground that hasn't been tilled in a very, very long time. But every state has laws and has procedures for who is qualified to be on a ballot. So, for instance, and this has happened, if a 31-year-old runs for president, the Constitution says you have to be 35. The procedure is a little different in different states, but a citizen can go to court and say this person's not qualified, and a court will hold an evidentiary hearing, look at the evidence, and make that determination. Also, a Secretary of State, the chief election officer in a state, can make that determination themselves. They can say, again, this person's 32 years old, they can't be president, so we're going to take them off the ballot. The same thing applies here, even if the stakes seem a lot higher. It's really the same kind of qualification from the Constitution.
Yeah, Crew, for whom you work, has written that Section 3's text and historical applications make clear that a criminal charge or conviction is not necessary for a person to be adjudged disqualified. Section 3 can be adjudicated through civil lawsuits. And with respect to presidential candidates, the disqualification clause can be enforced by, as you said, state election officials and in state courts as part of the process for determining who can appear on ballots for presidential elections. Final quick question for you. You got to do it ahead of time, though, right? Like, you can't do it after. It's got to be this question of, can they appear on the ballot as a front-end question?
That's right. I mean, you can go to try to remove someone from office once they're in office, but that's obviously a much more explosive situation to end up in. Yeah. When you have someone who shouldn't be qualified, you ought to get in there soon. That's what we intend to do, and we hope that, and we trust that courts and that election officials will follow the Constitution.
This is a real sleeper issue that we're going to stay on because I think it could be quite explosive as it proceeds. Noah Bookbinder, thank you very much. Displaced residents of Lahaina on the island of Maui are still waiting to return home as we see images of the nearly complete destruction of their historic town from wildfires. The destruction of Lahaina is especially hard because of the deep Hawaiian cultural history it held. In the 19th century, the town, situated on the island of Maui, served as the capital of the unified Hawaiian kingdom before colonization. Afterwards, it served as a cultural center, helping preserve traditional Hawaiian dance and revitalize the Hawaiian language. On the courthouse grounds, an 8-foot banyan tree planted in 1873 is now over 60 feet high, spanning nearly an acre. Today, the entire town is burned to the ground. At least 67 people are confirmed dead, though officials say they do not know how many people may have died in and around Lahaina or how many people may still be missing. Nearly 2,000 structures burned down, including irreplaceable historical buildings. But among the few things left standing is that banyan tree, which is smoldering and damaged, but still there. Brian Schatz is the Democratic senator from Hawaii who shared these images from a devastated Maui during his tour of the area yesterday, and he is here to tell us about it now. Senator, it's great to have you under awful circumstances, and like I said to Senator Hirono last night, everybody I've talked to and seen is thinking about folks in Hawaii and pulling for you and sending love and concern. What did you see yesterday when you were able to tour the parts that were so devastated?
Thanks, Chris, for doing this, and thank you for your kind words. And I just want to thank everybody across the country and across the world for the solidarity and the support and the money that is pouring in, because this is a disaster ongoing. We are still in disaster response. We are not in the rebuilding phase. But what I saw was it was as though a bombing run had happened on Lahaina. It's flattened. It is razed to the ground. The sugar mill is intact. The lighthouse is intact. The banyan tree is still standing, but it's unclear whether it or not it will survive. But basically everything else is gone. We've got thousands of people now in temporary shelters. We're trying to restore power and telecommunications, but this is every bit as bad as the pictures. We walk down Front Street, and it is a smoldering, toxic mess where it used to be this vibrant town of Native Hawaiians and Filipinos and Portuguese and Caucasians and tourists from all over the planet, and people surfing and fishing and watching the whales and having a beer and dancing hula. And it is now what you see on the screen. So it's a devastating time for the people of Hawaii, and we appreciate the solidarity as we navigate through the next several weeks and months and years.
So the next steps now, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, the fire itself is largely contained and not currently threatening folks. But what are the next steps in this emergency response?
Well, it's a couple of things. First, we do have a bunch of unhoused people, so we're working with FEMA to free up hotel rooms. South Maui is still operational from a resort standpoint, so we're trying to free up enough hotel rooms to accommodate our local residents as we try to figure out a little bit more of a medium-term temporary shelter situation. And then today, teams from FEMA are arriving with dogs to do the final search and rescue because nobody has entered any of these structures that have burnt down. And that's where we unfortunately anticipate that the death toll will rise significantly. Simultaneous to that, we've reopened the road to West Maui. West Maui is a pretty big place, not just Lahaina Town. Lahaina Town is not accessible. It's not safe to be there. But the rest of West Maui was cut off from vehicular access, so people were starting to run out of stuff. Toilet paper, water, gasoline, food, clothing, everything. So that's been reopened, and will kind of alleviate a little bit of the challenge. And then over the next several weeks and months, it's going to be a big job of debris removal. It is not safe to go into Lahaina. It is not safe to rebuild in Lahaina. It's not even safe to remove stuff. So FEMA, the Department of Defense, Secretary Austin called me this morning to express not just his solidarity, but his willingness to deploy resources to the island of Maui to help with debris removal. We're going to need EPA in there to make sure that the toxicity is handled. But the next step is debris removal. And we've gotten pledges on a bipartisan basis from high-ranking officials in the legislative branch to support the funding necessary in a supplemental appropriations bill to allow Maui to rebuild, Lahaina to rebuild.
You represent one of the most distinct special places on Earth, and also one of the places on Earth probably most exposed to climate risk for a bunch of reasons. This fire is the product of a lot of different confluence of things, from invasive species to drought and other things. But you know, you've been an outspoken climate hawk on this issue, and how are you feeling about where we sit right now, having just looked at this destruction yesterday?
You know, my old friend Neil Abercrombie, who was governor and I was lieutenant governor, he said, you know, there's only one thing worse than being wrong in politics, and that's being right. And people will never forgive you for being right. And I sort of feel like right now what we are seeing is the climate crisis in 3 dimensions. It is no longer a political question. It is no longer a polarizing question. It's just what's happening to the people on the island of Maui. And we're seeing that increasingly in Colorado, in Arizona, in Washington State, in Oregon, in California. This is our new reality. So we've got to do 2 things. First, we've got to understand that that reality requires that we manage our forests differently, that we manage our resources differently, and that we are prepared for an increasing frequency and severity of severe weather events. And secondly, although we took a big action on climate, the biggest action in the history of humankind last year, it's not enough. And we need to keep our pedal to the metal in terms of whatever we do next has to continue to lead to address the climate crisis. But that's not going to deal with wildfires next summer. That's not going to deal with droughts and floods next summer. And so we've also got to beef up our emergency management and disaster recovery.
Senator Brian Schatz on the Hawaiian Islands, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Chris.